Hi, everyone. My name is Jermaine House. I'm the Senior Director for Communications at Hit Strategies. I want to thank you all for joining us today. So we call this briefing because last week, President Biden indicated that he would support a congressional resolution to effectively block DC's revised criminal code. So a reaction to that, we sent out a note saying that, racist crime talk is driving a majority right Congress to overturn a fair criminal code law and supported by 83% of DC's majority minority voters. So we sent that note in part because along with all the misinformation surrounding the bill, there was little coverage of what people who were most affected by the bill thought about the bill. And there are many suggestions that people in DC actually disapprove of the bill, which is not the case. So we have Terrence Woodbury here from His Strategy CEO. He will walk you through the public opinion data on this bill. And also because of the magnitude of this decision, we wanted to preview some general data on how popular many public safety measures are among Democrats and the American public in general. Because if such a criminal code like this can be kind of jettisoned, right, on the back of one of their top priorities like DC statehood, then we have to find a different way for Democrats to engage on this issue. So we want to show you guys what we know about some public safety issues and measures and what people actually think about those measures so Democrats can stop playing some of the defense on this issue. We also joined by Patrice of DC Justice Lab. Her group commissioned the poll we did a few months ago. They're experts on the bill. They can tell you what it accomplishes. They can also show you some of the, shed some light on some of the things we heard about the bill that may be considered misinformation. They also play a big role in kind of helping promote this bill, so they can also tell you what their next steps are for this. So without further ado, I will let Patrice kick off the discussion. Go right ahead, Patrice.
Thank you, Jermaine, and thank you to Hit Strategies. This was an incredibly helpful polling project. I'm just astounded that Hit Strategies was able to work with us the way you did to take something so complicated and make it really understandable to people who are being polled about this bill. My name is Patrice Sultan. I am the Executive Director of DC Justice Lab. Before this, I served as a Senior Attorney Advisor for DC's Criminal Code Reform Commission, which drafted this bill. And when I was at the Criminal Code Reform Commission a couple of years ago, I was visiting the US Supreme Court for oral argument and sat next to someone who I started telling about our work. And he mentioned to me that he'd written an article for American University on the subject of DC's criminal code, and I immediately knew which article he was talking about. I'll share that article for you in the chat, but it dates back to 1975. And the reason I bring that up today is I want people to understand that as soon as we had home rule in the District of Columbia, the need for this project was immediately clear, that we couldn't continue to live under the same criminal laws that we've had since we inherited them from Congress in 1901. We have one of the worst, most confusing, vague, unconstitutional penal codes in the United States. It's ranked 45th of the 52 jurisdictions here, including the District of Columbia. And the commission was tasked in 2006 with making sure that all of our statutes made sense. This was not the kind of effort that I would lead in my current role at DC Justice Lab. This was an effort aimed at setting the floor, making sure that the elements of our offenses and defenses and general part were clear, and modernizing our criminal code the way the majority of states did in the 60s and 70s when the Model Penal Code was published by the American Law Institute. Because this new code is even newer, we were able to do it better than what the American Law Institute did half a century ago. And our elements of our offenses are even clearer. So where many jurisdictions have at least spelled out what is the conduct, what is the result, what is the circumstance that the government has to prove in order to convict someone of an offense, the DC revised criminal code goes a step further and does a great job of explaining what the intent requirement is, or the mens rea requirement is, for each of those different elements. So it's incredibly thorough. And when you look at the supporting documents that accompany the bill, what you're looking at is an explanation for each change in law and each possible change in law and how that relates back to the Criminal Code Reform Commission's mandate, which again was to make sure that we didn't have unnecessary overlap, unnecessary gaps, unconstitutional statutes, old statutes that are just dead letter law sitting on the books. By way of comparison, I want to explain how quickly this kind of legislation has moved through other places. Although the revised code was not set to take effect until 2025 and some provisions are delayed as late as 2030, in the meantime, we see that states that enjoy full citizenship in this country move legislation much more quickly. We've heard legislators out of Florida talking about how this is going to be one of their most productive sessions yet. We've watched organizations like the American Legislative Exchange Council move things like stand your ground laws through 30 states at a time. And in the meantime, DC doesn't even have a self-defense statute on the books for us to add or amend the way these states have changed their self-defense laws to include those kinds of provisions. So I appreciate being able to sort of share some background about what the bill actually does. And I think part of the reason I was invited was to also share a little bit about what it doesn't do, because most of the reporting I've seen on the bill grossly mischaracterizes how it's going to function in practice. The main thing that I want to address, and I'm happy to take questions from anyone who wants to know more detail about the bill, but the main thing I want to address is that the headlines that we see about this softening penalties, about this being soft on crime, about this reducing penalties are incredibly misleading. The majority of the project was spent defining the offenses themselves. And after all the offenses were defined, they were put in rank order. So please understand that the most severe offense in our code is murder, first-degree murder while armed, more specifically. And there we have set a de facto life sentence based on how long people live in Washington, D.C. on average. The remaining offenses are then put in order underneath murder, and they are ordered according to their severity. So when you hear a call for higher penalties, understand that what people are asking for are things like punishing an unarmed burglary higher than murder, or punishing someone possessing a gun higher than someone shooting another person with a gun, and throwing off that ordinal ranking of offenses. We have authorized maximum penalties that are considerably higher than what we actually see in practice in Washington, D.C. And we looked at that data to make sure that there wasn't going to be a huge disruption in our common practices, although there arguably should be. So I will address just the one that I've seen over and over again in a little bit more detail, which is carjacking. Carjacking currently is punishable by the same amount of time as second-degree murder in Washington, D.C. Nobody actually gets the same amount of time for a carjacking that they get for a murder in Washington, D.C. And so that penalty moved closer to what people actually get, but is still 9 years longer than the highest sentences we see for carjacking here in the District of Columbia. So that said, I will turn it back to HIT Strategies, and please let me know if there's anything else that I can help fill in.
Thank you so much, Patrice, for your incredible work on this and for your partnership, for your thought leadership, and for commissioning HIT to help define the residents of the citizens of the district's opinion on these issues. I wanted to pause to see, are we doing questions here, Jermaine, or do I jump right into the data? I think you're saying go right in. On mute.
Yeah, we should do questions after you finish, but go ahead.
Let's do it. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, you all know me as a poster. I cannot speak without slides, so I'm just going to share my screen and go into some data. Like Jermaine said, there's been a lot of talk about the impacts of this bill, a lot of misinformation about the bill, and not a lot has been said about what the actual voters in DC want. Can you all see my screen? Good. All right, let's jump in here. All right, first things first, 86% of DC voters generally support criminal justice reform. 83% of DC voters support the revised Criminal Code Act, and 79% of DC voters are more likely to vote for candidates that support the RCCA. And so this is, this, 83% is broad, damn near universal support. When we hear things like, because of the mayor's opposition, that was representative of what the voters of DC wanted, that is just demonstrably untrue, empirically untrue. 83% support is higher than, and that's 83% of all voters in Washington, is higher than support that we see for legislation almost anywhere. So let's get under the hood here a little bit, under these numbers. All right. Of course, before we ask them if they support or oppose, we have to tell them what it was. This is the actual definition that we used in the poll. The Revised Criminal Code Act creates a uniform classification system for all criminal offenses. It redefines the legal elements that determine criminal liability. The legislation creates 9 classes of felony offenses, 5 classes of misdemeanor offenses, with minimum and maximum sentencing ranges proportionate to the severity of the crime. Simply put, the RCCA would revise the district's criminal laws to create a clearer, more uniform system for classifying offenses based on the severity. With that definition, we saw 83% support, including 87% support from Black women, 87% support amongst older Black voters. We call these two out because we have seen in reporting and in anecdotal remarks that Black seniors and Black women would be the most opposed to this, as the closest, as being the most concerned about crime, would also be the most opposed to this bill. It is the opposite. They express the highest support for this bill. That is true across all demographics. It's the same question, just kind of broken out by demo here. And you see 80% support across all groups: older, younger, Black, white, men, women, across all groups. This bill enjoys over 80% support. We also asked more broadly, generally speaking, do you support criminal justice reform? You see very similar numbers here, above 80% support for broad criminal justice reform. But we also want to go into individual policies here, because it's one thing to, we wanted to anticipate the criticism that, yes, voters might broadly support the bill, but what if they knew the individual tenets and the individual policies? And so we tested that too. And what you see here is over 70% support for every single one of these policies that we tested, including guarantees the right to a jury trial for any offense that carries possible jail or prison time. The RCCA also creates a process for judicial review and resentencing on a case-by-case basis after a person has served at least 15 years in prison. These are some of the parts that we thought would be less popular. Over 80%, 85% support. Establishes guaranteed punishments for weapons offenses, with longer prison sentences for brandishing or shooting a gun than for possessing a gun. We told them that the code would revise weapons charges, specifically would reduce these maximums for possessing a gun versus for firing the gun. Over 80% support. We told them that it eliminates mandatory minimum sentences that require judges to impose a prison sentence instead of alternatives such as probation and restricting opportunities for people to be considered for release. We told them that. 77% of DC voters supported that as well. It decriminalizes conduct such as panhandling, playing games in the street, possession of an open container outside of a vehicle, and certain forms of illegal vending. Over 70% support. And finally, that it eliminates life sentences and sets a maximum sentence proportional to the seriousness of each offense. These are all of the things that the bill is being attacked for. We told them that this is exactly what it does, explicitly, beyond the legal jargon. It eliminates life sentences. We told DC voters that. Over 70% support it. And finally, we gave them this this AB test where option A was that judges should be able to determine the most appropriate sentence based on the facts in each case, and eliminating mandatory minimums doesn't stop them from imposing a prison sentence when it is needed. Or B, criminals need to be punished for breaking the law, and eliminating mandatory minimums just makes it easier for soft on crime judges to let them go with a slap on the wrist. We gave them both of these options. They overwhelmingly 79%. This is pretty consistent. The 70 to 80% support is consistent no matter how we word it, no matter how we present the options. This is what DC voters want. In every single way that we can present it, we reach 80% support. And finally, because we do understand that while this is uniquely impacting voters of citizens of DC, this does have national implications, and it does begin to point towards a reoccurring problem in elections that will certainly be a problem in the 2024 election, as it was a problem in 2022, and those are issues of crime and public safety, and where we are finding that Democrats have an opportunity here to speak to the evolving attitudes of the public, but seem more and more out of step with Democratic voters. Overall, Americans prefer smart on crime solutions. This tough on crime rhetoric, it is out of step with where the general public is. It is far out of step of where Democratic voters are. But overall, 75% of voters prefer an alternative first responder instead of a police officer to respond to mental or emotional distress episodes. 62% of all voters, not just Democratic voters, prefer funding non-police responders and social services over maximizing police budgets. When we start to, and this is nationally, when we start to look into some other cities beyond just the locale of DC, we see this trend continuing across all urban centers, whether we look in Columbus, where just last year we asked these questions on the right. We asked which of the following candidates are you more likely to support? 31% said they would support the tough on crime candidate who says to make Columbus safer. We should get tougher on crime and invest more in police and lock up more people who are committing crimes and enforce stricter penalties. 31% of Columbus voters supported that candidate over candidate B, who believes that to make Columbus safer, we should get smarter on crime, invest in services to prevent the root causes, including affordable housing, jobs, mental health care. And then on the left, you see when we actually give them a list of options and say, which of these things would make you feel safer? You see things rising to the top, like mental health services, affordable housing, and better police training. The things that are not rising to the top here are more police officers and stricter penalties. The same is true in Atlanta, where we gave very similar options on the right, smart on crime candidate versus a tough on crime candidate. We also asked explicitly on the left, some people are saying that ensuring safety and well-being for everyone requires funding community services by redirecting resources from police and jail and better funding access to jobs, housing, and childcare. Overwhelmingly, 57% of all voters in Atlanta support the smart on crime approach. And so no matter where we look at this, from DC to Atlanta to Columbus to Denver to Houston, we see that the general public are becoming more progressive on these issues and more compassionate on these issues and want to address and want to see smarter approaches, exactly what we were able to achieve with the revised Criminal Code Act, and that is now being threatened and to be overturned. And finally, just a little bit of media guidance here. We'll share this around, but DC is an overwhelmingly, a majority diverse city with only 25% of Congress being non-white and now being able to determine the outcome of or overrule home rule, as well as some stats here on mass incarceration and some other stats on district voters. but that's a bit of information overload, and I want to make sure we have some time for questions.
Okay, please, if you have any questions, you can come off the mic. Please chat me if you're having trouble with that. And we can answer any questions for you. I know someone asked, can we share the deck? We will share the deck after this call.
And Patrice, while we wait for questions, what should people do? You know, considering where we are in this process, what can people actually do if they want to take action here?
So there's a direct action planned for tomorrow at 11 a.m., beginning at Columbus Circle outside Union Station. And you may have heard that the chairman of the DC Council is attempting to withdraw the bill, but they're still on the Senate side planning to move forward with the vote on the disapproval resolution. So staying tuned for next steps for what the council plans to do when they say they're going to rework the bill, I think is especially important. It's one thing to rework a bill by getting additional community input, which is something we should always be doing, and a way in which our laws should always be evolving over time. But it's another thing to just capitulate to all the fear mongering and add in penalties that don't make sense and that make the code incredibly unfair.
Okay, Kimberly Crenshaw has a question.
Hello, Dr. Crenshaw. Thank you.
Should I just read it? Did I read that correctly? White support for reform candidates is even higher than that of African Americans by a few points.
Yes, and so this is something that we started to see over the summer of 2020. I can show this. In the summer of 2020, come on, share your screen. The summer of unrest, we started to see these issues of race and justice. Can you see this? Can you see my screen? Not yet.
No.
And so, yes, in the summer of 2020, we started to see issues of race and justice become ubiquitous. Where it wasn't just Black and brown people that were calling for more just and equitable policing, but also white progressives became even more intense around some of these issues. While this is not just a poll of white Democrats, it is a poll of Atlanta. And the white voters in Atlanta are going to skew much more progressive. And so you do see higher support here amongst white voters in Atlanta than even Black voters in Atlanta. Oh, wait, that's not the one. So. Actually, it was about the same. Hope that answers your question.
Okay, while we wait for any more questions, one of the reasons we wanted to have this call is because we really wanted the data to be a part of the discussion that's happening on social media and in your conversations with the media, because we know so many of you are in contact with media all the time. So please know that in addition to, of course, I think DC Justice Lab is planning a protest tomorrow. So people will be, we can get you the information to kind of share that with your networks as well. But in general, we really wanted to use this data to combat any notion that this bill was disapproved of by people in DC, and in general, right, it's a pretty remarkable move for Democrats to, in a big manner, go against one of their top priorities, which has also always been DC sovereignty and DC statehood, over something as benign as a criminal code, a revised criminal code, right? If that is where we're starting, then the next 2 years for Democrats are going to be pretty difficult, because that means that anything can be categorized as soft on crime, and then Democrats just start running away from every party that we have. So we wanted to make sure that we got you information that kind of help you illuminate that on your social networks and on your when you're talking to media. I see Kimberly is typing another question. I'll give you time to get that in.
Well, we will share this deck immediately after this call. Please share as far and as wide as you can. Please share on your social. And if you have any other questions for me or Patrice, please let us know here at HIT and we can get you connected. Yes, Dr. Crenshaw, I love where this is going. That's exactly right, Dr. Crenshaw. There's again, these issues of race and justice, in some cases, we do see white progressives expressing higher urgency for reform, even than Black voters. And so this is where the movement has evolved from Black people versus the police to a movement that's largely young people versus racism. And that I'm sure that's what we're going to see tomorrow during the day of during the demonstration tomorrow. It's going to be fueled by young people, and a lot of the work that Patrice is doing is fueled by a lot of young people.